The Dallas Cowboys are about to play arguably their most important game of the NFL season against the Philadelphia Eagles. This game could possibly determine whether or not the Cowboys could win their division, and it could instill a ton of faith in the fan base as it pertains to the Cowboys truly being able to compete with what's considered one of the elite teams in the National Football League. I think all of us are holding our breath to see, is this Cowboys team different? The first thing that people are going to draw their attention to, though, as it pertains to the upcoming Philadelphia Eagles and Dallas Cowboys matchup, is going to be the referees and the penalties, as the penalties and the refereeing has been a huge point of discussion throughout NFL fan bases throughout the entire season. And I'll be one of the first to admit, it feels like the refereeing has been bad on all accounts. I don't want this video to come off like a hit piece as if I'm trying to pick fun at the Philadelphia Eagles. We're simply putting the microscope on them in particular because they're next up on the Cowboys schedule. And to be quite honest, the findings are a little bit ridiculous considering the Eagles are a team that has caught a lot of scrutiny because everyone feels like the Eagles have the referees in their pockets. At this point, you might as well call them the Philadelphia referees because it's ridiculous. Anytime you're watching one of their games, it feels incredibly tilted towards them as it pertains to how the game is being called and the amount of laundry being thrown on the field in favor of the Dirty Birds. In this particular video, I want to not only take a look at some of these metrics as we take a look at some stats that are actually quite shocking and show that Philadelphia is in fact getting a favorable advantage over their opponents as it pertains to the refereeing of the game. And we about to learn you a couple things because there's one thing I want to accomplish on this channel. I want to not only entertain but also inform you guys anytime you watch one of these videos. And today we're going to look at the actual language behind what is a holding call, what is a false start, as it's stated in the official NFL rule book, because there's been videos at this point that have been released on YouTube that shows the Philadelphia Eagles getting away with more than 40 missed calls in the last matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. This video has kind of caught fire on YouTube and a lot of people have seen it at this point, so I'm not going to go ahead and show a bunch of this particular video, but what I am going to do is link that video in my description so that way you guys can go give it a watch. It's 22 minutes long, so no, we're not about to react to it because it's shown multiple different times where the Eagles could have easily been called for several different flags. And in fact, if you watch the Eagles, man, you've seen it. It jumps out on the screen how often it looks like their right tackle, Lane Johnson, should be getting called out for a false start, or how often it looks like the Eagles are getting away with holding calls. A lot of the penalties that go uncalled seem to happen in the trenches for the Eagles. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. All right, so the first thing I want to go ahead and take a look at as it pertains to the numbers behind this particular topic is 2023 NFL team penalties. This particular statistic is going to show exactly how many penalties these teams are being called for in this season, who's the most penalized and who's the least penalized. So one of the most penalized teams in the National Football League, even after the Seahawks seemed like they got called for 30 penalties against the Cowboys last week. And I'll be the first to admit, the Cowboys got like 5 or 6 first downs off of penalties. Some of them were pretty sketchy. I'm gonna be real, bro. So the Seahawks being up there, I am not surprised, but surprise, surprise, guess who's second place? The Dallas Cowboys are in second with 90 total penalties has been thrown against the team throughout this season so far through just 13 weeks, right? Now, where are the Eagles on this list? If we scroll all the way to the bottom, then we'll see the Eagles all the way down here, pretty much what, 6th from last with 65 penalties. The lowest amount of penalties thrown this year has been against the Las Vegas Raiders, but the Eagles are very, very far down for a team in which I said it legitimately looks like you could point out several penalties from these guys, and they're obvious to the point to where they're jumping out at you on the screen, and I don't really know how they're not called with some of these penalties. I mean, come on guys, we've even seen it several times on national television the last few weeks, even when the Eagles were playing against the Buffalo Bills, and that's when there was a receiver in the area. So it's just certain situations like that that really stand out to you whenever you're watching the Philadelphia Eagles. But again, they're one of the least penalized teams in the entire National Football League. But it gets deeper than that. So remember, we're talking about Lane Johnson and the offensive line and as far as how much they're penalized, right? if we actually take a look at the breakdown, meaning the penalties per player, how many penalties each player has accumulated for the Philadelphia Eagles, it gets even freakier. Lane Johnson, one of the guys that it feels like you can point out that he does this probably 10 to 15 times per game as far as false starting and getting that early start on a lot of the plays, has only been penalized 2 times this season. Now, anybody that's been watching the NFL this season, I'm sure that number just shocked the crap out of you, because when I saw that number, I was like, there is no way this man has only been called for 2 penalties all season. And yes, the 2 penalties he was called for was a false start. So he hasn't been called for any holdings. He hasn't been called for any of that. He's only been called for 2 false starts. And that is kind of crazy, because again, I've seen several situations, even when Micah Parsons matched up against the Eagles last time, where Lane Johnson 100% was holding Micah Parsons. So it's just crazy to see that this dude, someone that looks like he should be one of the most penalized offensive linemen in an entire football league, only has 2 penalties on the entire season. That is absolutely ridiculous, right? And now we're talking about Lane Johnson, we're talking about the Eagles, we're talking about what they're doing. So what I wanted to do was figure out, is what we're seeing actually what's supposed to be called as it says in the NFL rule book. So we went to the official NFL site, operations.nfl.com. Okay, so the first thing we're going to go ahead and take a look at here is the official rule for holding calls in the National Football League. All right, so it is a foul if an offensive blocker uses his hands or arms to materially restrict or alter the defender's path or angle of pursuit. It is a foul regardless of whether the blocker's hands are inside or outside the frame of the defender's body. Material restrictions include, but are not limited to, grabbing or tackling an opponent, hooking, jerking, twisting, or turning him, or pulling him to the ground. This is how an offensive holding penalty should be called. So some of those clips where we saw Lane Johnson have his hands all the way on the outside and they're holding their shoulder pads and they're kind of holding them back from being able to twist, turn, move, restrict them, that's holding, guys. You cannot do that. Generally, a good block is when you have your hands within the framework of the defender and you're able to actually grab them pretty much in their chest and jack them up and use your leverage. That is a good block. Holding them on the outside of their arms and essentially restricting them is not what a proper block is, and that's what we see them do a lot of the times. Okay, so that is the official rule for holding. So what's the official rule for false starts? It is a false start if the ball has been placed, ready for play, and prior to the snap, an offensive player who has assumed a set position charges or moves in such a way as to simulate the start of a play, or if an offensive player who is in motion makes a sudden movement toward the line of scrimmage. Any quick, abrupt movement by a single offensive player or by several offensive players in unison, which simulates the start of the snap, is a false start. The only exception to this is this does not apply to an offensive player under the center who turns his head or shoulders, unless the movement is an obvious attempt to draw an opponent offside. So essentially, what Lane Johnson is doing is not some loophole they're taking advantage of in the rule book. You can't do that. He's making a quick and abrupt movement dang near every single play where he's shooting his back leg out to try to get a head start on the rush. It is not some type of big brain play that the Eagles are making or anything. It's legitimately Lane Johnson false starting and not being called for it on every single play. Okay, so now that we've seen the rules, if we take a look at this, Philadelphia is tied for the 3rd most amount of penalties called against their opponents this season. Think about that. They're one of the least penalized teams in the league, but their opponents, NFL team opponent penalties per game, this is what the statistic is showing. Their opponents are the 3rd most penalized teams anytime they're playing against the Philadelphia Eagles. Okay, cool. Then we take a look at NFL team penalty first downs per game. Philadelphia, again, is one of the top teams in the league in this particular statistic. They have a top 5 number for this statistic. Now, I am also going to point out Dallas is up here as well. So Dallas is getting the benefit of some of these first down calls as well. But again, they're also one of the most penalized teams in the league. So that honestly kind of balances it out for me a little bit. Hell, if we're going to be the most penalized team in the league, we better at least be getting some calls from the referee, right? But Philadelphia, not only the least penalized team in the league, their opponents are the most penalized teams in the league, but they're also benefiting the most off of the penalties being called for them by way of first downs. So these are possession extending penalties right here, guys. All right, so Philadelphia again up here high. I am going to point out, I'll be remiss if I didn't, Dallas is up there pretty much just as high with a very similar number to Philadelphia. Philadelphia is getting roughly about 2 first downs per the penalties called per game, a little bit more than that. Dallas is at 2.4, Philadelphia is at 2.3. So it's not like a big difference. And this was before the Seattle game. After the Seattle game, I think Dallas actually went up to like 2.6 because let's be real, bro, they got like 6 first downs in that game against Seattle based off of penalties on like one drive down there. But very interesting statistic there, right? And essentially, anytime you start talking about the referees and rule rigging and stuff like that, you're really talking about sports betting. And what's interesting about the Eagles, man, is there's only been one game this entire year where the bettor would have had better odds to make money than the house as it pertains to the Philadelphia Eagles, and that was them beating the Kansas City Chiefs. The Eagles were not favored in that particular game. Kansas City was favored in that game, and they not only covered the spread, but they did beat Kansas City. And because Kansas City was favored in that game, you would have actually made money betting on Philly probably for the first time all season. They've been a pretty safe bet as it pertains to the house. And in a lot of those games, they were favored, which means even the people that were betting with Philadelphia in those games, it's not like the house is losing a lot of money having to pay those bets out. So if you look at the money line on the Eagles games so far this year, bro, for the most part, the house has not been losing a lot of money on Philadelphia pretty much at all season long, right? Against New England, the odds were Philadelphia minus 176, meaning you would have to bet $176 just to win $100 back, right? Against Minnesota, the odds was Philly minus 255. Again, you'd have to bet $255 to win $100 back in favor of Philadelphia. So it wouldn't even been smart to take those particular bets. People probably were trying to stay away from those bets, to be completely honest, or they were probably betting in favor of the Vikings or another team. And in that case, when these teams lost, the house is making a ton of money. So Philadelphia, if you look at it from a betting perspective, they have been making the house a decent amount of cheddar all season long. And that's just the honest truth, guys. That's the honest truth. They've been making a good amount of money all season long. People betting on Philadelphia has been a good thing for sportsbooks because they've been having to pay out a little bit of money, and anytime that the bet goes their way, they are making a lot of money. You see what I'm saying? So it's kind of interesting when you correlate that with the fact that the referees have seemingly been in favor of the Eagles, or they've been having a lot of influence on how the Eagles games have kind of turned out as it pertains to keeping teams close, or keeping the game close, or throwing a flag at the right time to keep the other team out of it, or to keep the Eagles in it. We've seen that on a couple different occasions throughout the year. But I say all that to say, yes, the referees could potentially end up being a problem for the Cowboys in this game against the Eagles, but I don't want that to be an excuse. The Cowboys are going to have to go out there and be the bullies. They're going to have to set a physical tone with the Eagles, and I know that they're capable of doing it. We have the dogs on this team to be able to do it. The referees are probably going to be a problem in this game. Let's be real. The referees are probably going to be a problem in this game. I feel like they're going to be active. So at the end of the day, it just comes down to our players not putting the game in position to where the referees can impact the outcome, period. We just got to dominate from the first quarter to the fourth quarter, and that's just what it's going to have to be. So there's going to be no excuses. I don't care what happens as far as refereeing goes. This is the second game the Cowboys are seeing the Eagles this year. The Cowboys have to win. It's point blank, period. But either way, y'all know it's in these videos how them Cowboys. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take it away, Pastor.
Calling me, texting me, paging me, asking me, am I still them boys? Y'all usually check on me. Listen. I'm still them boys. Hey! Woo! Oh, shut up, my boy. Hey! I'm still them boys.